The clatter of cutlery on plates broke the heavy silence that had settled over our Wednesday dinner. I sat across from Ethan, my husband of 6 years, scanning his face for a spark of the caring man I once knew. Instead, his eyes dodged mine while he shoveled pasta into his mouth with an odd kind of haste. My attention shifted to his phone lying beside his plate. A notification blinked provocatively, almost daring me to open it. Against my better judgment, I couldn't resist. Ethan remained oblivious as I leaned over and entered his passcode. His acting had become so believable that the message burned into my consciousness like splinters of broken glass. Can't wait to have you inside me again. See you at my place in an hour. The sender's name? Olivia. I read it over and over, my heart aching as the words sank deep. So this was why he'd been so distant lately. Coming home late without explanation, his focus constantly wandering off to whatever secret thoughts plagued him. "Everything all right, honey?" Ethan asked, his tone as innocent as ever, a tone he'd mastered over the years. I slid his phone back across the table, utterly speechless. His eyes went wide as his carefully maintained mask finally slipped, revealing a flash of panic. In that instant, I realized the man I thought I knew had been a complete illusion all along. "Laura, I can explain," he began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't bother. Just tell me one thing. How long has this been going on?" Ethan hesitated, opening his mouth then shutting it again, his shoulders sagging in defeat. 6 months, he finally admitted, the words hitting me like a punch. 6 months, half a year of lies and deceit. While I continued to care for our home and dream of a future with a man who had already checked out of our marriage. "Who is she?" I demanded, though deep down I already knew. "Olivia, the gorgeous 20-something interior designer who worked on a project at your office." He chuckled bitterly. "Does it really matter? She made me feel things I haven't felt in years." His words cut into what little heart I had left. I nearly collapsed in anguish. Wanted to scream until my throat was raw, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me utterly broken. Summoning every bit of strength, I stood, grabbed my purse, and marched for the door. "Where are you going?" he called after me, a hint of concern creeping into his voice. I turned, eyes blurred with unshed tears. "I'm leaving," I said firmly, my tone final. "And when I come back, you better be gone, because I don't even recognize you anymore." I flung the door open and stormed into the night. Every step away from our fake marriage only strengthened my resolve. I'd been foolish to believe in the picture-perfect life we built together, but that fantasy had finally shattered, broken beyond repair. I spent a sleepless night in a hotel, tears streaming as the full weight of Ethan's betrayal crushed me. How could the man I loved, the man who promised to cherish me, be so callous as to toss our marriage aside? The next morning, blinded by pain but determined to act, I contacted a private investigator recommended by a friend who'd endured a messy divorce. Within 24 hours, he unearthed a sordid trail of evidence that left me shaking with anger and disgust. Ethan hadn't just been having a fling with that shallow interior designer, Olivia. The report revealed multiple affairs spanning over a year, complete with emails, credit card records, and dated photos of him entering different hotels with various women. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Davies," the investigator said as he laid the damning dossier on my kitchen table. "Your husband has been extraordinarily prolific in his indiscretions." I clenched my fists, fighting off waves of nausea as one name and face leapt out at me. Olivia, the woman whose provocative text had blown open this entire sordid affair. "I want to know everything about her," I told him, my voice hardening with fury. "Where she lives, where she works, every detail." 2 days later, he handed me an address. A stylish apartment in an upscale part of town that I could never have afforded on my own. It was clear Ethan had been funneling money to keep his mistress living in luxury while I stayed home, oblivious and caught in a reckless daze. I drove to Olivia's place, using a temporary code the investigator had provided to enter the lobby. Her door was unlocked, an ideal chance to confront the woman who had decimated my life. I stormed in and was immediately greeted by an opulent interior that confirmed my husband's lover had expensive taste. "Hi," a silky voice called from another room. "Is that you, Ethan?" I gripped my fists as the slender, raven-haired seductress glided into view, clad in nothing but a clinging silk robe. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "You," I spat through gritted teeth. "You're the one who wrecked my marriage," rather than showing any decency or shame. She arched a perfectly shaped eyebrow and smirked mockingly. "Well, if it isn't the famous Mrs. Davies. I was just wondering when you'd pop in to check out the woman your pathetic husband can't resist." A surge of white-hot rage overtook me, and before I could stop myself, my hand lashed out, slapping her square across the face with a resounding crack. She gasped, recoiling in shock, and I felt a savage thrill at having wiped that smug expression off her face. "You're going to regret that," she hissed, one hand clutching her rapidly reddening cheek. "Wait until Ethan hears about this," I fired back. "He's leaving me for you, isn't he?" I advanced until she was backed against the wall. "Let me give you a reality check, you home-wrecking snake. He's broke, spending our money on hotels, gifts, and this fancy apartment, all to a desperate little girl like you." A flicker of revulsion crossed her face before her arrogant mask snapped back into place. "We'll see about that," she sneered. "This isn't over, Mrs. Davies. Not by a long shot." I watched in disgust as she slunk away, my desire for revenge burning hotter than ever. "This is just the beginning," I thought bitterly as I stormed out. After my explosive showdown with Olivia, I was boiling over with a mix of pain and fury, a volcano ready to erupt. I raced back home, unable to think of anything but the need to wipe that condescending look off the homewrecker's face once and for all. Ethan had already moved his few essentials into the guest room sometime during my vengeful errand. His eyes went wide as he saw me barreling through the front door. "Laura, what's going on?" he asked, alarmed by the thunderous look on my face. I didn't bother to speak. Instead, I hurled the damning evidence gathered by the investigator across the room. Printed emails, photos, and bank statements fluttered to the floor like confetti. Ethan's face paled as he scanned the incriminating documents, finally grasping the full extent of his misdeeds. "You've been having multiple affairs," I stated, my tone dangerously calm. "For over a year, it seems. And that's not even the worst part." I held up another set of papers, detailing the obscene sums he'd been funneling into a hidden account, no doubt to fund his lavish trysts with his mistresses. "The money, Ethan. How could you rob us to dine and drink, instead of showing any remorse?" I hissed. Anger flashed in his eyes as he straightened up, exuding a desperate fury. "Don't you dare take that holier-than-thou tone with me," he shot back. "You drove me to this. Laura, our marriage has been a dead, empty shell for years. Can you really blame me for seeking happiness elsewhere?" My jaw dropped at the absurd reversal. My shock quickly hardened into seething anger. "Happiness?" I echoed incredulously. "With that manipulative gold digger, Olivia? She's no profound, enlightened woman, Ethan. She's just bleeding you dry." A moment of doubt flickered across his face, but his stubbornness held firm. "That's enough," he said coldly. "I want a divorce, Laura. In fact, I've already called my lawyer. I'm done with your constant nagging and this miserable marriage." His blunt words pierced what little was left of my heart. I recoiled, feeling the room spin as my shattered world crashed down. I could barely see Ethan as he gathered his things and stormed out the door without a backward glance. Just like that, it was over. My dreams, my life as I knew it, obliterated in one swift moment by the man who once vowed to love me until death. Amidst the debris of our broken vows, I finally gave in to the urge to scream, a raw, anguished cry that shattered the numbness inside me. I screamed until my throat burned, trying to purge the trauma of his betrayal. As the echoes of my cries faded, a surprising clarity settled in. Through the blur, I noticed a familiar rectangle poking out from a folder, the deed to our family home in my name alone. My father, years ago during his estate planning, insisted on putting the house solely in my name just in case. At the time, I dismissed it as his cranky mistrust of Ethan. Now, with the first sparks of vengeance lighting my chest, I silently thanked him. I wouldn't be left with nothing after this devastation. With that deed firmly in hand, I vowed to fight back and rebuild from the ruins. Ethan had left chaos in his wake. If he wanted a war, so be it, because I was only just getting started. The next few days blurred together in a haze of anguish and fury. I spent countless sleepless nights poring over the investigator's file, my eyes burning as I fought back tears. But tears wouldn't fix anything. Only decisive action would guarantee that I emerged from this nightmare with my pride and financial security intact. Armed with reams of evidence documenting Ethan's endless infidelities and financial misdeeds, I marched into the office of Rachel Miller, one of the city's toughest divorce attorneys. She was a real shark in heels, and I needed every ounce of her fierceness. Rachel flipped through the documents with practiced ease, her polished exterior cracking slightly as she absorbed the sordid details. "Good heavens," she muttered, removing her glasses to look at me in disbelief. "I've seen some cheating jerks in my time, but your husband is a top-tier specimen." I managed a weak smile at her blunt honesty. "Can you help me, Rachel? I want to take everything he's worth." A wild grin spread across her face. "With evidence like this, he won't know what hit him." Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I crafted an unbreakable plan to decimate Ethan's finances and hold him responsible for his endless betrayals. We planned not only to freeze any assets he'd hidden away to fund his sordid second life, but also to demand a crushing alimony sum for his deception and financial abuse. "Olivia is the key," Rachel explained, tapping her pen against a photo of a property record. "If we can prove she knowingly profited from your husband's affair, we can go after her assets too. Trust me, that interior design gig brings in a lot of cash." My heart raced at the thought of making Olivia face the same reckoning that Ethan was about to endure. Ever since our bitter confrontation at her apartment, she'd slithered away, no doubt waiting for her lover's endless wallet to keep funding her fancy lifestyle. Well, she'd soon get a rude awakening, just like the scorned wife. Meanwhile, Ethan had grown suspiciously quiet, probably stewing in denial while dreaming of a fresh start with his new fiancée. If only he knew that our once loving relationship was about to transform into a brutal legal battle that would leave him penniless and disgraced. Finally, the storm broke when Rachel delivered a mountain of paperwork to Ethan's rented apartment, a motion to freeze all his assets based on evidence that he'd grossly misused our marital funds to support his affairs. He had no choice but to hobble into court and face the fallout of his actions. The look of pure horror on his face at our first hearing was almost worth the bitter betrayal. His arrogant mistress was nowhere in sight. Perhaps she'd finally cut her losses before I dismantled her meal ticket. Ethan's ashamed expression quickly turned to rage as Rachel methodically presented every piece of evidence, from bank statements to hotel receipts listing the names of his mistresses. His lawyer could only stutter, overwhelmed by the scorched earth case we'd built. "You're making a huge mistake," Ethan snarled after the humiliating proceedings, grabbing me in the courthouse lobby for a brief moment. For a split second, the man I once loved flashed in his eyes. "Laura, we can stop this. We can work things out. Start over," he pleaded. I met his gaze with icy contempt as Rachel stood nearby, ready to pounce if he pushed further. "Did you really think I'd just let you slip back into your pathetic second act?" I asked. The sting of my words sent his face into a contorted sneer. "You're going to pay for this, you vindictive." Rachel immediately stepped in, raising a hand to warn him. I gave her a reassuring nod. After everything he'd put me through, his feeble threats bounced off my newfound armor of indifference. "Believe what you want," I said, turning to leave. "But remember this as we move forward. You brought this on yourself, Ethan, and I'm only just getting started." After that explosive first hearing, the legal war between Ethan and me descended into vicious mudslinging. His lawyers claimed I was fabricating evidence of secret meetings with other men to boost his indiscretions. a rich accusation coming from a man who had been paying for not one, but several mistresses during our marriage. I steeled myself against the slander, focusing on the righteous fury burning inside me every time I recalled his betrayal. Rachel assured me, these are just desperate moves to create smoke screens. The evidence trail doesn't lie. All we need is one crack in his sordid facade, and his entire world will collapse. Fate, it seemed, was ready to provide that crack in the most unexpected way. While updating the investigator on our latest legal moves, he offhandedly remarked, "That Olivia sure gets around, doesn't she?" I froze, my hand clenching around the phone. "What do you mean by that?" "I've been digging into Miss Perfect," he explained. "It turns out she isn't just cozying up with your soon-to-be ex. I have proof she's also involved with an older, wealthier businessman on the side." White-hot indignation surged through me at the thought of that smug, silicone-soaked snake pulling the same double-dealing act on multiple men. So much for her claims of being a victim of circumstance. In that moment, a devilishly clever plan began to form in my mind. "Keep digging on that other guy," I instructed the investigator. "I need every detail, who he is, where they meet, everything." A mischievous grin spread across his weathered face. "You've got a juicy one in mind, haven't you, Mrs. Davies?" I matched his grin with a steely look of determination. "Olivia thinks she can sink her claws into married men without consequence. It's time she gets a taste of her own medicine." Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I worked closely with the investigator to build an airtight case against Olivia's extracurricular activities. We gathered photos of her entering a high-rise luxury condo owned by business mogul Richard King, a 60-something tycoon with an empire and, more importantly, a wife who was extremely image-conscious, Samantha King, reigning at the top of that empire. "You know what they say," Rachel mused as we reviewed surveillance stills of Olivia and Mr. King in compromising positions. "Mistresses always promise they'd never leave their spouse for a woman like Samantha. But if they learn the truth about how brazenly their lover is playing the field with other wealthy marks, it might just push them over the edge." My eyes gleamed with vengeful anticipation. Olivia's sanctimonious, holier-than-thou act was about to be shattered once we went public with her rampant infidelities. If she thought she could trade the sanctity of marriage for her own selfish ends, it was time for her world to crumble. And as for Ethan, when footage emerged of his adored fiancée cavorting with other wealthy lovers behind his back, every last ounce of sympathy in him would vanish. It was the ultimate insult for a man who had risked everything to leave his family behind for empty promises of love. They were perfect targets, both of them, now reduced to greedy, arrogant fools, mere lambs awaiting the slaughter I was meticulously planning. By the time I was done, not even the ashes of their swollen egos would remain. After weeks of quietly assembling damning receipts, photos, and call records, everything was set for my grand counterattack. I could hardly contain my excitement as I dialed Rachel's direct line. "It's time," I said, my voice laced with finality. "Let's burn this whole rotten facade down." The annual charity gala at the Westbridge Hotel was the perfect stage for my grand vengeance. A swanky, high-profile event attended by the city's elite, including Ethan and his precious Olivia, who were undoubtedly basking in their glamorous new image as a power couple rising from the ruins of our failed marriage. Little did those two arrogant fools know that their entire sham was about to explode in front of all their well-heeled peers. No amount of public politeness or sweet lies could shield them from the reckoning I had so carefully planned. When Rachel and I arrived at the luxurious Westbridge Hotel ballroom, our eyes scanned the glittering crowd for our targets. Sure enough, there was Olivia, draped over Ethan like a gaudy, overpriced trophy. Her body-hugging scarlet dress left almost nothing to the imagination. Eyes on the prize, Rachel whispered in my ear as I felt a mix of disgust and pity for the man I once loved. "It's showtime." Our preparation had been flawless. While mingling with the city's upper crust under the guise of soliciting donations, I slipped Rachel's assistant the explosive photos and videos we'd compiled of Olivia's rampant affairs. Our evidence bomb was set to go off within minutes. Soon, the first murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. Guests gasped and pointed their phones as salacious undercover shots of Olivia with her elderly tycoon lover went viral. Someone must have recognized the notorious Richard King. The scandal quickly took on a life of its own, spreading like a toxic rumor. Rachel and I feigned innocence as partygoers gaped in scandalized awe, but I caught a glimpse of Olivia's face draining of color. Her painted lips twisted in rage as she finally connected the dots about who was behind her public unraveling. Then, out of the blue, a sleek ivory shoe appeared at the edge of my vision. I followed the impossibly toned leg up to the furious face of Samantha King, Richard's scorned and ultra-affluent wife. "You think little of me," she snarled, spitting as she seized Olivia by her perfectly styled hair. "Did you really think you could keep making a fool of me behind my back?" Samantha yanked Olivia around to face the crowd, ripping open the front of her dress in a shower of sequins and exposing her artificially enhanced assets to everyone at the gala. Olivia shrieked as camera flashes exploded like strobe lights, her arms frantically trying to cover herself. I scanned the room and saw Ethan standing slack-jawed at his disgraced fiancée, a nauseating mix of shock and self-pity on his face. I watched, a perverse satisfaction building inside me, as realization dawned on his malleable features. Olivia had only been using him as another wealthy plaything to fund her lavish lifestyle. Poetic justice indeed. The two people most responsible for wrecking my life were now facing brutal public humiliation on the grandest stage imaginable. As Olivia broke free from Samantha's grasp and fled he ballroom in hysterics. Ethan turned toward me with a haunted, empty stare. Our eyes met across the crowd of stunned guests. And in that moment, I let the full force of my vindication blaze across my face. "You did this to yourself," I mouthed, letting the words linger like the bitter scent of retribution. His jaw clenched, and with a reluctant nod he admitted, in his own way, that I had indeed delivered the ultimate punishment. Then he turned and slunk away through a quickly forming gap in the crowd, leaving behind a trail of disgrace and ruin. I sipped my champagne, savoring the moment as Rachel appeared beside me. "Well, Mrs. Davies," she murmured with a proud smile, "I believe tonight has been a resounding success, don't you?" A savage grin spread across my face as I surveyed the catastrophic scene my vengeance had wrought. "You have no idea," I replied, "but I have a feeling this is only the beginning of something beautiful." In the aftermath of the Westbridge Gala debacle, Ethan did what any disgraced, humbled man would do. He slunk back with his tail between his legs, begging for mercy. I'll admit, seeing him reduced to a shell of his former arrogant self gave me a twisted sort of satisfaction. Gone were the false bravado, unearned superiority, and callous indifference to my pain. Now, sitting across from me in Rachel's office, he looked more like a stray dog than the man I'd married for 6 years. "Laura," he croaked, and I glared at him with unabashed disdain. "I don't know what to say. What happened with Olivia?" "God, I was such a fool," he stammered, letting the silence fester until he squirmed under my relentless gaze. "I know I can never take back all the hurt I caused you," he continued, his shame plain to see. "But please, give me one more chance. Let me make things right." A harsh laugh burst from me before I could stop it. "Make things right?" I echoed incredulously. "Ethan, you cheated on me with multiple women throughout our marriage. You drained our money, lied, and manipulated me at every turn. What makes you think you deserve a second chance?" His eyes widened as he realized the magnitude of his sins. "I was destroyed when I saw you with Olivia," he stuttered. "She was just using me as a meal ticket to fund her lifestyle. When that footage came out, I finally saw how blind I'd been, how terribly I'd failed you as a husband by letting my desires run rampant." I regarded him stone-faced, refusing to let his rehearsed remorse break through my resolve. "Do you have any idea how it feels," I said in a low, menacing tone, "to have the man you build a life with not only betray you, but humiliate you over and over again? To learn that you were tossed aside like a worthless burden in favor of chasing cheap, interchangeable flings." Ethan visibly wilted under the weight of his guilt, his features contorting into a pitiful mask of regret. Good. Maybe you're finally getting a taste of the pain you've inflicted on me. I was a monster, he admitted weakly. A selfish, vile monster who didn't deserve your unconditional love. I don't expect your forgiveness, Laura. I just hope I can make amends somehow, even if it means giving you every last penny I have, so I can stop being the despicable person I've become. As his sniveling pleas washed over me, my stomach churned at the thought of indulging his need for atonement. I was no longer the naive, pliable woman he once married. I would never allow him to manipulate me with fake remorse ever again. Rising to my feet, I looked him dead in the eye and caught a fleeting glimmer of hope that maybe I could offer him absolution. That hope died immediately when I spoke. I don't want your money, Ethan. I want you out of my life. He flinched as if struck, his guilty expression melting into sheer shock. You're not serious? Don't play dumb. I snapped, fighting the urge to slap his treacherous face again. After everything you've done, every lie, every sordid indiscretion, do you really think I'd be foolish enough to let you sneak back into my life? I leaned across the table, so close that I could see every tremor on his face. If you agree to these terms right now, I'll make sure this divorce is finalized quickly, and you can slink off to your debauched second life. But you will never, and I mean never, ask for my forgiveness or understanding again. Do you hear me? You lost that right the moment you treated our vows like trash. Ethan could only gape silently, struggling for words. Rachel placed the paperwork between us with a slight nod. Your choice, Mr. Davies, she intoned. The tiny print on the documents loomed large. Either you dig your heels in further or accept these generous terms, giving Mrs. Davies the peace she deserves to move on once and for all. The silence stretched on endlessly as I watched a torrent of emotions cross his face. Indignation, shame, bitter acceptance. Finally, with a resigned grunt, he grabbed a pen and scrawled his name on the dotted line, sealing our divorce. Our eyes met one last time, and a ghost of a triumphant smile curved my lips as I saw his chastened expression. You never hear from me again after this, he mumbled through gritted teeth. I hope you find the peace you're looking for. Laura, you deserve far better than the depraved bastard I once knew. With that, he turned and strode out of the office, the weight of his failure dragging down each step until he vanished down the hallway. I exhaled a long-held breath. It was finally over. The man who once meant everything to me was erased from my life like a cancer. At last, I could close that dark chapter and move on to a new reality, one of my own making, shaped by the venom of his actions. Rachel placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, her usually sharp smile softening. You did it, she murmured. You've reclaimed your power and dignity. I've never seen anyone rise from the ashes like you have. I returned her smile, the promise of endless possibilities shimmering on the horizon. This is just the beginning, I said firmly. My new life starts now. 6 months after Ethan's bitter departure, the divorce papers were finally finalized, thanks to Rachel's relentless legal battle. I emerged from the ruins of our shattered marriage with most of our shared assets, including the deed to our family home, which now belonged solely to me. As part of the agreement, Ethan was legally barred from contacting me. Not that he would have anyway. I heard through the grapevine that he had slunk away, nursing his wounds in quiet shame after our explosive downfall that ruined his reputation. I can't say I felt any joy in seeing him reduced to such a state. My focus was solely on embracing the new chapter ahead. There is a strange catharsis in knowing that the man who tried to destroy me was now as broken as I had been. The media had a field day dissecting every salacious detail of our divorce saga. The headlines screamed about the scorned wife who outlasted her cheating husband, and I became a sort of divorce warrior queen, a folk hero for those who'd suffered similar betrayals. It was a peculiar feeling, but not entirely unwelcome. After all the trauma Ethan inflicted, I refused to wallow as a victim. My new life would be one of strength, resilience, and building something positive from the ashes he left behind. Nearly 3 months after the divorce was made official, I hosted an intimate gala at the Westbridge Hotel ballroom. the very site of Olivia's downfall months earlier. The city's elite mingled among towering arrangements of fresh roses, and a string quartet provided elegant background music. But this time, there were no scandalous affairs to steal the spotlight. This event was the inaugural fundraiser for my foundation, Laura's Light, dedicated to supporting women who have survived infidelity and emerged stronger. My speech that night drew thunderous applause from the well-to-do crowd as I explained our mission: to offer counseling, legal aid, and financial help to divorcees in need. A portion of the millions I'd recovered from Ethan would kickstart the foundation's early days. No woman should ever feel helpless after a spouse's betrayal, I proclaimed from the podium, scanning the captivated audience with renewed poise. With compassion and community, we can help rebuild lives from devastation and let them flourish, a new life, just as I have. After my remarks, a line of well-wishers and potential donors quickly formed. I greeted each one with a warm smile, my heart swelling with pride and purpose. Who would have guessed that the confident, self-assured woman presiding over this crowd was once a broken soul lying shattered on her kitchen floor only a year ago? The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the power of determination and relentless pursuit of justice. I was so energized by the success of the evening that I barely noticed a newcomer waiting patiently at the end of the line. He was a trim, handsome man in his early 40s with striking hazel eyes that gleamed with admiration. "Mrs. Davies," he said warmly as his turn arrived, his voice carrying a subtle hint of a British accent. "I must commend you on such a worthy and impactful mission. Your story of overcoming unimaginable heartbreak is truly inspiring." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite myself by his polished demeanor. Up close, I could see he was dressed in a slim-fitting tuxedo, his sandy hair neatly styled, a man of considerable means. "You're too kind, Mr. Scott," he replied with a roguish smile. "Andrew Scott, a good friend of Richard King. Actually, though I suspect our circles have drifted apart these days after his own personal mess." A slight twitch of amusement crossed my lips at his understatement. Of course, the humiliating affair between Olivia and Richard had completely ruined the tycoon's marriage and reputation. Andrew was no doubt hinting he'd cut ties with that disgraceful mogul. "I'm a journalist by trade," he continued, emboldened by my bemused expression. "But my real passion has always been to share stories like yours. Tales of courage, perseverance, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit." My heart skipped a beat as our eyes locked, a subtle electric charge sparking between us. Andrew Scott was undeniably charming, and, I must admit, far easier on the eyes than I'd been accustomed to recently. "Well, Mr. Scott," I said, extending my hand with a coy smile, "if you truly feel moved, perhaps you'd allow me to share more about my trials over a drink sometime?" His grip was warm and confident as he accepted my handshake, holding just a moment longer than necessary. "I would be absolutely delighted, Mrs. Davies, more than you can imagine." Watching him melt into the glittering crowd of socialites, I felt a giddy spark of excitement, a thrill for new possibilities and a future unburdened by past trauma. The crushing weight of Ethan's betrayal had nearly broken me, but through sheer determination, I had turned that devastation into triumph. The future was finally mine to shape on my own terms, and this dazzling night beneath Westbridge's shimmering chandeliers was merely the first light of a new dawn. No longer a victim, I was now a victor, reborn from the ashes of my former life.